The waiting room of Galactic Medical Consortium Station Varath 7 smelled like nothing. That was the first thing Dr. Kalen Meir noticed whenever he entered the patient processing wing. Not antiseptic, not organics, not recycled atmosphere. Nothing. The consortium had engineered the air to be precisely neutral, stripped of all chemical signals that might trigger a biological response in any of the 43 species currently under regular care. The result was an environment that felt like the inside of a thought. Clean, sterile, and somehow deeply wrong to any creature that had evolved under an open sky. Kalen was Vihari. His species had been members of the consortium for 600 years, long enough that his people had stopped thinking of space medicine as exotic and started thinking of it as infrastructure. He had spent 31 years as a diagnostic specialist, the kind of physician who received cases after everyone else had already decided they were unsolvable. His reputation was built on patience, on the slow accumulation of detail, on the belief that biology did not lie. Only the physician's interpretation of it could. He wore his credentials the way his species wore their secondary skin membrane, quietly, without display, as something that simply existed because it had grown there. The case arrived on a morning that had otherwise been unremarkable. A human, female, approximately 34 years by her species calendar. She had been transported to Varath 7 from a Frontier Transit Hub 2 systems out, flagged by an automated medical scanner that had encountered a reading it could not classify and had therefore escalated to the nearest facility with a diagnostic specialist on staff. The flag code was 7 Epsilon, which in the consortium's triage language meant biological anomaly, origin unclear, potential contamination risk. Kalen had seen 7 Epsilon flags before. They almost always turned out to be benign, a dietary compound that read as toxic to scanners calibrated for other species, a symbiotic microorganism that a patient had forgotten to declare, once an elaborate crystalline structure in a Tarathi male's secondary liver that had turned out to be a cultural implant and not, as the automated system had hysterically suggested, a parasitic infiltration. The 7 Epsilon flag was, in his professional experience, the system's way of admitting it didn't understand something and was too embarrassed to say so plainly. He reviewed the initial report while walking to intake. The human, her name was listed as Dr. Yara Vasquez, which meant she held some form of academic or professional credential herself, though in what field was not specified, had arrived semi-conscious, dehydrated, and showing signs of systemic stress consistent with extended exposure to a low-oxygen environment. The transit hub medics had stabilized her. The automated scanner's flag had been triggered during a routine blood panel. The specific notation read, metallic compound detected in circulatory fluid. Concentration significant. Nature non-organic integration unclear. Possible internal contamination or unknown biological weapon component. Recommend immediate isolation and specialist review. Kalen read that twice. Then he read it a third time, more slowly. He was not a physician who frightened easily. He had diagnosed a Kethrani patient with a prion cascade that had already compromised 60% of their neural lattice and had delivered that information with the same measured calm he used to discuss routine blood work. He understood that medicine required a certain emotional distance not because physicians were cold, but because panic in the physician transferred directly into panic in the patient, and panic patients made poor decisions about their own care. So when he felt something tighten in the middle of his chest as he read the word metallic in the context of a biological circulatory system, he recognized it, filed it away, and continued walking. Yara Vasquez was awake when he entered. She was lying in the diagnostic bay with the particular stillness of someone who had learned, through experience, that conserving energy was worth more than appearing composed. Her skin was darker than most humans he had encountered in medical literature. The consortium's files on humans were sparse, humans having only recently applied for associate membership and not yet having integrated fully into the standard medical registry. And her eyes, when they found him, were the color of deep water. They were also, despite her evident physical exhaustion, extremely alert. She did not speak first, neither did he. He pulled up her preliminary panel on the display beside the bed and reviewed it in full before saying anything, because he believed in reading before interpreting, always, and because he suspected that this patient would notice if he performed thoroughness rather than practicing it. The blood panel was extraordinary, not in the way that alarming things were extraordinary, not with the jagged, asymmetric signature of contamination or infection, but in the way that genuinely unexpected things were extraordinary. The metallic compound the scanner had flagged was iron, not an ingested residue, not an environmental contaminant. Iron integrated into the circulatory proteins with a specificity and completeness that could only mean one thing: it was supposed to be there. It was structural. It was functional. The iron was not in her blood like an intruder. It was in her blood like a foundation. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in the trade language that all consortium facilities used for patient communication, "Your blood uses iron." She blinked. "Yes?" "To carry oxygen." "Hemoglobin," she said, and the word was clearly from her own language, but she offered no translation, which meant she assumed he could either find it or figure it out. He found it was the latter, because hemoglobin was not in the consortium's standard xenobiology index. It's the protein. The iron sits in the center of it. When oxygen binds to it, it changes color. That's why blood is red. The iron. He looked at her. Then he looked at the panel. Then he looked at her again. "I need to ask you several questions," he said, "and I need you to understand that I am asking them from a position of professional unfamiliarity, not from alarm." "I am not alarmed." Something moved in her expression that he could not immediately classify. It was not quite a smile. "Okay," she said, "how much iron does a healthy human body contain?" She considered this. "About 4 grams in total. Roughly 2/3 of it is in the blood. The rest is stored in various organs, liver, bone marrow. The body recycles it constantly. When red blood cells die, the iron is recaptured. It's very efficient." He entered that into his notes. 4 grams. The amount was simultaneously negligible and, given what that amount was being asked to do inside a living organism, staggering. 4 grams of a heavy metal integrated into a protein sitting at the functional center of the entire oxygen transport system. He had treated species whose blood used copper. He had treated species whose blood used vanadium-based compounds. He had never encountered iron. Iron was, in galactic chemical taxonomy, classified as a heavy reactive metal, stable under specific conditions but deeply toxic in several common biological environments. The fact that a species had not merely tolerated it, but built their entire respiratory function around it, struck him with a force that he was not yet fully prepared to examine. "When iron is displaced from hemoglobin," he said carefully, "what happens?" "We die," she said without drama. "Not immediately. The body compensates for a while, makes more red blood cells, gets tired, gets confused. Eventually, the heart and brain can't get enough oxygen and everything shuts down." She paused. "It's called anemia. In its severe forms, it's fatal. And the treatment? More iron. Either dietary or intravenous, depending on severity. You treat iron deficiency with more iron." "Yes." He was quiet again. She watched him with that watercolored alertness, and he had the distinct impression that she was measuring his reactions with the same precision he was trying to bring to hers. He amended his initial assessment of her. The credential in her name was not decorative. "What is your field?" he asked. "Biochemistry," she said. "I've been working on a colonial research station, one of the frontier outposts. We had a depressurization event. That's how I ended up on the transit hub." She said it cleanly, without effect, the way people describe things that had frightened them once they had decided the fear was finished with. He returned to the panel. He began running the secondary diagnostic sequences, the deeper ones, the ones that built a structural map of the biological system rather than simply cataloging compounds. He did not tell her what he was looking for because he was not yet sure. He only knew that his understanding of iron as a substance and his observation of iron as it appeared in her biology were creating a dissonance he needed to resolve. Iron was reactive. In an oxygenated environment, which a blood-based circulatory system necessarily was, iron would, under most chemical models, oxidize. It would rust. The idea of a species running rusting metal through their bodies every second of every day and surviving it, thriving on it, building their entire oxygen economy around this managed, perpetual, controlled oxidation event, he found it almost architecturally beautiful in the way that very dangerous things sometimes were. He said, "The iron in your blood is constantly in contact with oxygen." "That's the point," she said. "And it doesn't oxidize freely. The protein prevents it." Hemoglobin holds the iron in a configuration where it can bind oxygen temporarily without being permanently oxidized. It grabs the oxygen, carries it to where the body needs it, drops it off, and comes back. Over and over. A single red blood cell does this for about 120 days before it degrades. 120 days. He calculated quickly. At rest, a human heart moved blood through the body once per minute. In that minute, hundreds of billions of those cells were completing their circuit, each one carrying its iron, each iron binding and releasing oxygen in a cycle so precise and so continuous that the entire architecture of human consciousness, movement, and metabolism rested on it. It was not, he realized, a biological quirk. It was engineering. The kind of engineering that looked reckless until you understood that it had been refined across millions of years into something so efficient it bordered on elegant. He finished the secondary diagnostic. He sat with the results for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he said, "You lost significant blood in the depressurization event. There was a panel that gave way," she said. "Cut my leg. I had it tourniquet sealed within about 40 seconds. 40 seconds is a long time to bleed. I know. Your iron levels are low, meaningfully low. Your body is compensating. Your bone marrow has upregulated red blood cell production to make up for the loss. That's what's causing the exhaustion." He paused. "Your body responded to losing iron by making more iron-carrying cells." "Yes, quickly. The body prioritizes it." He looked at her. "Do you understand how unusual that is?" She seemed to consider her answer. "From a human perspective, no. But I suspect from yours, yes." That was the first moment he began to understand that the conversation they were having was not entirely a medical consultation. Or rather, it was a medical consultation, but it was also something else. A negotiation of perspective that she had been conducting since the moment he walked in, and she was considerably better at it than he had initially credited. He pulled up the secondary diagnostic results on the display and turned it so she could see. He showed her the bone marrow activity. He showed her the reticulocyte count, the immature red blood cells her body was producing in accelerated numbers to compensate for the ones she had lost. He showed her the iron storage analysis, the way her liver and spleen were releasing reserves with the careful precision of a rationing system that had prepared for exactly this kind of crisis. She looked at it the way a person looks at a familiar map, finding the landmarks they expected. "Your species evolved this response," he said. It was not quite a question. "We bleed a lot," she said. "We're soft, relatively speaking. No exterior armor, no natural toxins, limited physical advantages over most large predators in our evolutionary environment. We bleed and we heal, and the healing is tuned to the bleeding. The iron recycling, the clotting cascade, the bone marrow response. It all developed because we spent a very long time being something that other things tried to eat. He absorbed that. You developed a sophisticated iron-based oxygen transport system, he said slowly, as an adaptation to being prey. Partly, she said, also to endurance. Human hunters in the early period didn't catch prey by being faster. They caught them by following them until they collapsed. Long-distance running, sustained over days if necessary, that requires a very efficient oxygen delivery system. The iron chemistry is part of that. We can sustain aerobic effort for much longer than most comparably sized species because hemoglobin is, gram for gram, an exceptionally efficient oxygen carrier. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she shifted slightly on the diagnostic bed, and he remembered, with a small internal correction, that he was also her physician and she was also his patient, and she was also tired and had lost blood and needed actual medical care regardless of how interesting she was. He ordered an iron infusion. He calibrated it to human biochemistry as best he could from the data the diagnostic had returned, cross-referencing with the limited human medical information in the consortium index and supplementing with what she told him, because she clearly knew her own biology with professional precision, and he was not too proud to incorporate a patient's self-knowledge into a treatment plan. He adjusted the IV composition twice based on her feedback. She told him when the concentration felt wrong, and she was right both times. While the infusion ran, he continued asking questions. He told himself it was clinical due diligence. He was not certain that was entirely true. He asked about the iron in the diet. She told him that human nutritional science spent considerable effort tracking dietary iron, that it came in two forms, one from animal sources and one from plant sources, and that the body absorbed them differently and prioritized them differently, and that the entire digestive system had adaptations to maximize iron extraction from food because the demand was constant and the supply was variable. She told him that humans frequently struggled with iron deficiency and that it was one of the most common nutritional disorders on her planet, which initially seemed to suggest a design flaw, until she explained that iron was also a substrate that pathogens competed for, that the body sometimes deliberately suppressed iron levels during infection as a defense mechanism, that the very scarcity management of iron was itself a strategy. The body hid its iron from illness. It starved the pathogens of the metal they needed to replicate. He sat with that for a very long moment. A species that had taken one of the most reactive metals in the common periodic table, integrated it into the center of their respiratory biology, built an entire system of storage and release and recycling and defense around it, and then used that same metal's properties as a weapon against the organisms that tried to infect them. The iron was not simply a structural choice. It was a multi-layered biological strategy that had been refined over epochs into something that was, by any rigorous measure, deeply sophisticated. He thought about the 7 epsilon flag. Possible internal contamination, potential biological weapon component. The automated scanner had looked at iron in blood and seen danger, and it had been wrong about the source while being almost inadvertently correct about the nature of it. There was something weaponized about human iron, just not in any way the scanner's categorization system had been built to recognize. He said, when you were in the depressurization event, before the tourniquet, you lost consciousness. No, she said. He looked up from his notes. I had maybe a minute before I was going to, she said. But I had the tourniquet applied before that happened. I've had basic field medicine training. All the researchers on frontier stations do. You sealed your own wound with significant blood loss while oxygenated to your brain sufficiently to think clearly and act precisely. Barely, she said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that was not entirely composed. I had my hands shaking before I was done. But you were done. She looked at him. I had to be. That was the sentence he kept returning to later, after she had slept and recovered and been discharged with a dietary supplement plan he had assembled from scratch because the consortium's standard pharmacological library did not yet contain a section for human iron metabolism. He filed that gap as a formal report, flagging it for urgent remediation. He also filed the case report for the human patient under a new taxonomic category that he created on that day, not because it was required by any protocol, but because he needed there to be a category, because what he had encountered did not fit anywhere that existed. The category he created was biological imperative optimization under existential constraint. The human body had not evolved iron-based blood despite iron's dangers. It had evolved iron-based blood because of them. The reactivity was the point. The risk was the architecture. It was a species that had looked at a volatile, dangerous, oxidizing metal and said, with the particular and unreasonable confidence of something that intended to survive, "This is the one," and had then spent millions of years making it work so well that it now ran through their veins without their thinking about it, sustaining them through blood loss and infection and altitude and exertion and every crisis their environment had been able to produce. He thought about what that meant for who they were, not as a metaphor, as a clinical observation. A species whose foundational biology was built on the principle that the dangerous substance, properly managed, was more effective than the safe one, that the controlled instability was worth the risk because the performance it enabled was irreplaceable. He thought about what it meant that they had applied that logic once, at the cellular level, billions of years ago, and it had become the premise from which they had built everything else. He thought about the frontier stations, the research outposts at the edges of explored space. He thought about Dr. Yara Vasquez, a biochemist, alone in a depressurizing compartment with a structural failure she had not caused and no assistance she could count on, tourniquet sealing her own leg while her hands shook, getting it done because she had to be done. He thought about humans applying for associate membership in the consortium with the species profile that listed no significant military history, no claimed territorial expansions, a self-reported technological development timeline that was, by galactic standards, extraordinarily compressed. A species that had gone from hunter-gatherers to space-capable within a geological eye blink. And he thought about iron, running red through all of it, and the quiet, foundational message that iron represented. We looked at the thing that could kill us and made it the center of how we live. He submitted the case report. He submitted the pharmacological gap report. He submitted a third document, which was not a standard form and which he created from scratch in the same way he had created the new taxonomic category. Because it needed to exist, because the consortium's institutional framework did not yet have a place for what he wanted to say, and because after 31 years of practice, he had learned that the most important clinical findings were often the ones that did not fit anywhere. The third document was addressed to the consortium's xenobiology division, its ethics board, and the committee currently reviewing the human application for associate membership. It was brief. He was not a man who believed in length for its own sake. It said, "I have completed a diagnostic assessment of a human patient presenting with a 7 epsilon flag triggered by the detection of iron in the circulatory system. The iron is not a contaminant. It is integral. I am attaching full clinical notes. I am flagging this case not because it represents a danger to consortium member species, but because the automated system's response to it reveals a fundamental misclassification in how we are approaching this species' integration. We categorized the iron as a potential weapon. We were attempting to describe a fact about them without understanding it. I recommend that the associate membership review process be extended to include a comprehensive xenobiological assessment conducted by specialists rather than automated systems before any policy decisions are finalized. I also recommend that the assessment be conducted with the understanding that the human biological profile should not be evaluated against the metrics of other species because it was not built on the same premises. It was built on different ones, more demanding ones. I do not yet know the full implications of that difference. I think that uncertainty is important to acknowledge. He signed it with his practitioner designation and sent it, and then he sat for a while in the consultation room after the patient had gone, in the air that smelled like nothing, and thought about iron. About a living body that kept iron in its blood the way a careful person keeps a fire in a hearth, for the heat, for the light, for the life-sustaining warmth it produced, with the constant quiet knowledge that fire could also burn the house down, and the decision, made once and then made permanent in every cell, that the warmth was worth it, that the light was worth it, that a species could look at the thing most likely to destroy it and choose to carry it internally every second, because what that thing enabled when properly carried was something no safer alternative could match. He filed his reports. He returned to his other cases. He did not speak about the consultation with colleagues, not yet, because he was still determining what it meant, and he distrusted conclusions drawn in the immediate aftermath of surprise. But he did add one note to his personal research file. It was not clinical language. He rarely used his personal file for clinical language. It was instead the kind of notation that accumulated over a long career when a physician encountered something that changed the size of the map they were working from. The note said, "Humans carry iron in their blood. It is dangerous." They made it not dangerous. They made it essential. There is a philosophy in that which I do not fully understand yet, and which I think the consortium does not understand at all. We should be careful not to classify what we do not understand as safe, and we should be equally careful not to classify what we do not understand as dangerous. We should, instead, understand it. I am not certain we have time to be slow about this. He closed the file. The station moved through space in its slow institutional orbit. Somewhere in the outbound docking bay, a shuttle was carrying a human biochemist back toward the frontier. Her iron levels restored, her hands presumably steady, toward research stations at the edge of explored space, where the panels sometimes gave way and the air sometimes ran thin, and the distance from help was measured in days rather than hours. She would be fine. He found he was certain of that. Not because he had fixed her. He had given her iron and time, which was all she had needed. But because the thing that had brought her through the depressurization event was not something he had introduced into her system. It had been there already. It would always be there. Built in, at the molecular level, 4 billion years of refinement, concentrated into 4 grams of metal in a protein in a blood cell completing its circuit. She would be fine. And the consortium, he thought, needed to decide, relatively soon, how it felt about that.